Alexander Cole had built his empire on precision, on cold calculations, on the kind of discipline that never left room for distractions. Yet, on that sweltering summer afternoon, as polished cars rolled past downtown, and the glass-house bistro buzzed with hushed conversations in French and Italian, he was about to face a moment no balance sheet could prepare him for. Imagine this: a 6-year-old girl barefoot, stepping onto the marble floor of a luxury restaurant, whispering for day-old bread and being thrown out as if she were dirt on a shoe. What would you do if you saw that walk away or step in? Leave me your answer in the comments, because the choice Alexander made after he first ignored her changed everything in ways he never imagined. Cole sat in his reserved corner Armani suit, crisp laptop, open Bluetooth pressed to his ear, as he barked into a conference call worth $15 million. His fingers flew over the keyboard with the same sharpness that had cut through boardrooms for decades. Numbers were his language prophet, his rhythm, and the Glasshouse Bistro his sanctuary, a place he knew he could work without interruption. The clink of fine crystal, the smell of roasted espresso beans, the velvet hush of the room, all of it confirmed his world was controlled, predictable, safe. Until it wasn't. From the edge of his vision came a shadow too small to belong. A girl, no older than 6, dressed in worn clothes and covered in the dust of the streets, shuffled toward the counter. She didn't look up. Her voice cracked in the quiet, barely audible but sharp enough to slice through the air. "Please, sir, may I have some bread? Just the old kind. I'm so hungry." The owner. Mr. Halpern, a man whose mustache, curled with arrogance, exploded like thunderclouds. "Get out! This is not a shelter. Out now, and don't ever come back." His words crashed through the room, bouncing off crystal chandeliers, rattling patrons who pretended not to hear. Alexander looked up for a fraction of a second. The girl's eyes glistened, but she didn't beg again. She turned shoulders trembling and slipped out the glass door without a sound. Cole felt something stir, a ripple, a crack, but then the sharp voice of a Tokyo investor pulled him back. "Mr. Cole, are you listening? We need your commitment." The deal was too big. He forced himself to push her from his mind, locked his jaw, and drove the conversation forward. But the image of her small frame, walking barefoot across the marble, haunted the edges of his concentration. 40 minutes later, deal signed and money secured, Alexander closed his laptop. His heartbeat steady, his pride intact. He gathered his things with mechanical precision, straightened his tie, and walked toward the door. The glass gave way to scorching heat, the street alive with honking taxis and hurried pedestrians. He slid on his sunglasses, checked his messages, and prepared to move on. That's when he heard it, a voice so fragile it froze him mid-step. "Thank you, Heavenly Father, for this bread." The words floated from a narrow passage beside the bistro Ashford Alley, a place he had never noticed, though he had walked by 100 times. The gratitude in that small voice felt like it had no right to exist. Gratitude for what? For bread. For crumbs. Against all reason, his pulse quickened, his legs turned, and he followed the sound. There, in the dim light between dumpsters and cracked brick, Alexander saw her. The same little girl kneeling by an overturned trash can. In her small hands, she cradled a piece of bread so covered in mold it looked diseased, yet she held it as if it were treasure. Her lips moved in prayer, her head bowed. "Thank you for giving me food today. Please help my sister not cry tonight." Her words landed like punches against a man who thought he was untouchable. Alexander's chest tightened, and for the first time in years he had no script, no strategy, no numbers to hide behind. The hook of this story doesn't stop here, because what he discovered in that alley went far deeper than a hungry child and a piece of spoiled bread. But right there, in that moment, the millionaire who once prided himself on being unshakable felt the foundations of his life start to crumble. And the question that burned inside him, the same one I'll ask you, is this: when the world hands you a choice between your comfort and someone else's survival, which side do you stand on? The alley was cooler than the burning sidewalk outside, but Alexander Cole felt as though the temperature had dropped 20 degrees the moment he stepped inside. Shadows clung to the cracked brick, and the stench of sour garbage hung heavy in the air. He moved quietly, every step of his Italian shoes crunching against broken glass and crumpled cans. He was a man used to owning the space he entered, but here in Ashford Alley, he felt like an intruder. And then he saw her. Maya knelt beside a toppled trash can, her knees pressed into the grime. In her hands was a piece of bread so covered in mold that no rational person would consider it edible. But her tiny fingers traced its edges like it was porcelain. Her lips moved in prayer, whispering words he could barely make out, until one line hit him like a fist. "Thank you, Heavenly Father, for this bread." Alexander stopped dead. His world of boardrooms and balance sheets seemed to dissolve, leaving only this frail child clutching a rotten loaf as if it were a miracle. She tilted her face toward the sky, eyes closed, a soft smile flickering, despite the hunger carved into her features. He had seen investors bluff with millions, politicians posture for power, executives lie with perfect polish. But he had never seen anything as disarmingly sincere as that prayer over moldy bread. He wanted to speak, but the sound of his own breath felt too loud. For a long moment he simply watched, frozen between disbelief and something else, something that felt dangerously close to shame. Maya's voice trembled as she added, "Please help my little sister sleep tonight without crying so much." The mention of a sister sent a chill through him. This girl wasn't just scavenging for herself. She was carrying the weight of someone even smaller, even weaker, hidden somewhere beyond the shadows. Alexander shifted, and the scrape of his sole against the asphalt broke the stillness. Maya startled, her small body stiffening as she clutched the bread to her chest like contraband. Her eyes darted to him, wide, wet, terrified. "I won't do anything bad, mister," she whispered, her voice quick, defensive, trained by survival. "I was just thanking for the food. I won't dirty your nice clothes." Her words cut deeper than any insult ever hurled his way. He had spent his adult life insulating himself from vulnerability, building walls of wealth so thick nothing human could breach them. Yet here was a child apologizing for existing, promising not to stain the fabric of his world. He cleared his throat, his voice strangely unsteady. "You're going to eat that?" Maya nodded quickly, lifting the bread with pride, as though showing him a prized possession. "Yes, mister. It's still good. It just has a little green, but I can scrape it off." Her logic was childlike and devastatingly practical. "I found it in the bag the man from the bistro threw out. It's probably just from yesterday." Alexander looked closer. The bread wasn't a little green. It was rotten through crawling with spores. His stomach turned, but Maya's eyes held nothing but stubborn determination. This was not just food, it was hope. For her, hope came in shades of mold. "And your sister?" he asked softly, gesturing toward the dark corner behind a stack of boxes. Maya hesitated, then pointed with her chin. There, half hidden, a smaller figure crouched. Leah, no more than 4, clung to a ragged blanket, her wide eyes darting from him to her sister. She didn't speak, only buried her face into the fabric as if it could make her invisible. Maya tightened her grip on the bread. "She's still little. So I eat first. If I'm okay, then tomorrow I'll give her a piece. I don't want her to get sick." The words landed like blows. A child playing the role of food tester, willing to poison herself just to protect her sister. Alexander's throat constricted. He thought of the $1,000,000 wines he had refused because the year wasn't good enough, the filet mignon he had sent back because it wasn't rare enough. and here was a 6-year-old treating moldy bread like a shield against death. He crouched, slowly ignoring the scrape of his suit against the filthy asphalt. "What's your name?" Maya hesitated, studying his face, searching for deception. Trust was not something she could afford to give easily. Finally, she said Maya. "And that's Leah. She doesn't like big people. They scare her." Her honesty, stripped of any need to flatter or appease, stunned him. He nodded, his voice softer now. "And you live here, in this alley?" Maya glanced toward the corner where a makeshift shelter leaned against the wall. Layers of cardboard patched with plastic sheets formed walls no higher than Alexander's waist. A sagging plank served as a door. It was smaller than his walk-in closet, yet it was clearly their home. Ever since Mommy and Daddy went to heaven, she said simply, her tone carrying none of the drama adults might expect. The shelter lady said they'd separate us. So I took Leah and we came here. Nobody can take her if they don't find us. Her words were matter-of-fact, but to Alexander, they rang with the weight of a tragedy no child should know. He looked down at his manicured hands, at the Rolex on his wrist, worth more than most families earned in a year, then back at Maya's small dirt-streaked fingers gripping bread that could kill her. Something inside him cracked. Maya carefully placed the bread into a small cardboard box tucked inside their shelter. Every movement was deliberate, ritualistic, as if storing treasure in a safe. She patted the box, satisfied, and whispered to her sister, "See, we'll have food tomorrow, too." Leah nodded, eyes wide with trust, never questioning her older sister's logic. Alexander found himself asking a question that felt foreign on his lips. "Maya, what would you say if I offered you something better? A gift?" Her head snapped up, eyes narrowing, suspicion flaring. She had already learned the hard truth of the world: nothing came free. "What kind of gift, mister? I don't have money to pay." The innocence of that line nearly broke him. A child so young already believed kindness had a price tag. He shook his head, lowering his voice. "You don't have to pay anything. But what if I took you and Leah somewhere to eat real food, hot food, just for you two?" For a moment, she didn't answer. Her gaze studied his face, every crease, every flicker of expression, searching for cruelty or trickery. Her sister peeked out from behind the blanket, her small eyes flicking between them. Finally, Maya spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Can we eat together? I won't go if Leah can't." Alexander swallowed hard. That fierce loyalty, that refusal to abandon her sister even for the promise of a full stomach, cut him deeper than any corporate betrayal ever had. He nodded, extending his hand. "Of course. You stay together. Always." Maya looked at his hand, then at the bread box torn between two worlds, the moldy certainty of tomorrow, and the fragile hope of a stranger's promise. At last, she whispered, "Can I put my bread away first, in case we don't find food tomorrow?" Her voice was so small, yet it carried the weight of generations of hunger. Alexander nodded. "Yes." "Put it away." He watched as she tucked the bread carefully into the box, sealing it like a sacred relic. Only then did she stand, taking Leah's hand, and place her other trembling hand into his. In that moment, the man who had spent his life mastering numbers and crushing opponents felt something he had long buried rise within him. For the first time in decades, Alexander Cole wasn't thinking about margins or markets. He was thinking about a child, 2 children, and a loaf of bread that had no business being holy except in the hands of a little girl who had nothing else. Alexander Cole thought he had already seen the worst of it. The moldy bread, Maya's desperate logic, Leah's wide eyes clinging to her blanket. But as he followed the sisters deeper into the alley, he realized their tragedy wasn't limited to what lay in plain sight. There was more hidden in the shadows waiting for him to uncover. Maya stopped in front of the cardboard shelter, the structure so fragile that a stiff wind could have torn it apart. She crouched low, whispering into a small opening at the side. "Ivy, it's okay. Come out. We have food for you." For a few moments, nothing moved. Then the cardboard shifted, and a tiny figure crawled out into the light. Alexander's chest constricted at the sight. She was barely 2 years old, her frame so small it looked like it could break under the weight of her tangled hair. Dirt streaked her cheeks, but her eyes, those wide, innocent eyes, carried the same unmistakable spark as her sister's. This was Ivy, the youngest, the baby they had been protecting all along. She wobbled on unsteady legs, clutching a bottle so worn it was more plastic than function. Her first instinct was to hide behind Maya, her small hands gripping her sister's clothes, but when Maya placed a piece of the stale bread into her hand, Ivy clapped as if she had been given the world. The simple gesture was too much for Alexander. He felt his throat close and his vision blur, not from pity alone, but from the crushing weight of realization. 3 children, 3 lives left to fend for themselves in the margins of a city where men like him spent fortunes on champagne they barely tasted. "Does she live here too?" Alexander asked softly, though the answer was obvious. Maya nodded, adjusting Ivy's bottle and smoothing her messy hair with all the care of a mother twice her age. "She's our baby. Since Mommy and Daddy went to heaven, we take turns watching her. Leah helps me keep her quiet when she cries so nobody finds us." Leah, who had been silent until now, whispered, "She gets scared of the night. We tell her stories so she won't cry loud." The matter-of-fact way Leah said it shattered Alexander. A 4-year-old comforting a toddler through the darkness, while a 6-year-old rationed moldy bread like an army general. He felt the edges of his carefully built world collapse. Numbers, profits, negotiations, none of it mattered in the face of this raw, unfiltered survival. Ivy tugged on Maya's sleeve, babbling nonsense syllables, her eyes darting toward Alexander. Maya bent down to interpret. "She wants to know if you're safe." Alexander blinked. "Safe? She doesn't like strangers." Maya explained her tone. Protective, almost defiant. "But if I tell her you're safe, she'll believe me." The weight of that trust, offered through the filter of a 6-year-old guardian, pressed down on him harder than any corporate contract he had ever signed. He knelt slowly, lowering himself to Ivy's level. She peered at him from behind Maya, then extended her tiny dirt-smudged hand, still clutching the crumb of bread. It was her way of testing him, of seeing if he would take what little she had left. He didn't. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a silk handkerchief absurdly out of place in this corner of the city. He laid it gently on the ground in front of her. "That's for you," he said quietly. "Something clean, something that's yours." Ivy studied the square of cloth, then dropped her crumb onto it with ceremonial seriousness, as if she had just placed treasure into a chest. When she looked up at him and smiled a fragile, hesitant smile, Alexander felt something tear open inside his chest. "You 3 can't stay here," he murmured almost to himself. Maya stiffened immediately. Stepping in front of her sisters, her small arms spread wide. "We can't go to the shelter," she said quickly. "They'll take Ivy away. They'll split us up." I promised I'd never let that happen. Her voice cracked on the last words, and suddenly she wasn't a tiny general anymore. She was just a little girl terrified of losing the only family she had left. Alexander wanted to tell her she didn't need to fight anymore, that adults were supposed to protect children, not the other way around. But he knew that promises from strangers meant little in their world. He needed to show them. Leah crept closer, her blanket dragging across the ground. Her voice was soft, fragile. "Mister? Are you going to send us away too?" The question ripped through him. It was the kind of question that revealed their entire existence, every adult who had brushed them aside, every door that had been closed, every glance that dismissed them as a problem instead of children. "No," Alexander said firmly, his voice sharper than he intended. He softened, kneeling again so his eyes met theirs. "I won't send you away. Not now. Not ever." Maya searched his face for a long time, her eyes scanning for cracks. Finally, she let out a shaky breath. "We can come with you, if Ivy says yes." It was absurd and holy all at once. They were waiting for the approval of a toddler. Ivy blinked at him, then toddled forward on unsteady legs. She lifted her arms, a universal signal that transcended fear, hunger, and mistrust. Alexander hesitated for a moment, then reached down and picked her up. She was lighter than any child her age should be, her tiny body trembling, as if unsure whether this was safety or another fleeting kindness. But when she rested her head against his shoulder and sighed, he felt something click into place inside him, as if his life had just been split into two eras, before this moment and after. Maya and Leah stood close, watching with the kind of suspicion only children forced to grow up too fast could carry. But when Ivy wrapped her tiny arms around Alexander's neck and whispered something that only Maya seemed to understand, the older sister nodded slowly. "She says, 'You smell like home,'" Maya translated. The words undid him. He held the toddler tighter, knowing that no cologne, no wealth, no mansion could have ever earned him that title. Yet, somehow, to this little girl he already represented it. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the alley, Alexander realized he wasn't looking at a problem to solve or a responsibility to delegate. He was looking at his future, the 3 fragile, fierce, beautiful lives that had been entrusted to him, not by choice, but by circumstance, and perhaps by something greater. For years he had chased power, money, and respect, yet none of it mattered in this moment, not when Ivy's small hand gripped his collar, not when Leah's wide eyes followed his every move, not when Maya's defiance wavered just enough to let hope creep in. 3 sisters, 3 souls the world had discarded, and one man who finally understood what it meant to be needed, not for his wealth, but for his humanity. Alexander Cole had always known his sister Victoria was ruthless, but he had underestimated just how far she would go when money and power were on the line. When news broke that he had taken Maya, Leah, and Ivy into his home, the whispers started almost immediately. At first, it was social gossip, cocktail chatter about the eccentric millionaire bringing street children into his mansion. But gossip hardened into accusations when Victoria stepped in, her voice dripping with false concern, claiming her brother had lost his grip on reality. Within a week, Alexander's reputation was under attack. Articles appeared questioning his stability, speculating about irrational decisions, and hinting at impropriety that no one dared say aloud, but everyone understood. Investors began to pull back. The empire he had spent decades building shook under the weight of rumor, and at the center of it all was Victoria, orchestrating every move with cold precision. The attack became personal when Child Protective Services arrived at his estate. Uniformed officers and social workers poured into his home like an invading army. Maya, Leah, and Ivy panicked instantly. Maya clutched her sisters and shouted that they couldn't be taken. Leah cried, her small frame shaking, while Ivy buried her face against Alexander's chest, terrified. He tried to reason, tried to explain that the girls were safe, but paperwork and protocol mattered more than the truth. "Mr. Cole," one of the social workers said with a voice rehearsed in bureaucratic detachment, "these children cannot remain in your custody without proper legal guardianship. For their well-being, we must place them in temporary care until the courts determine next steps." "Well-being," Alexander roared. "Do you see their faces? Do you hear them crying? You're tearing apart the only family they have left." But his protests fell on deaf ears. In front of him, the girls were separated, each one pulled toward a different car. Maya screamed his name until her voice broke. Leah reached for him until her fingers were pried loose. Ivy sobbed into the hands of a stranger who buckled her into a seat, as if she were cargo. Alexander stood in the driveway helpless, as the 3 cars disappeared down the road, taking his heart with them. Victoria's hand was all over it. That night, she called him, her tone light mocking. "You can't fight the system, Alex. You may have money, but I have the law on my side. And the longer they're gone, the more those children will forget you." He gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles went white. "They're my family now. I won't let you destroy them." She laughed. "Family, don't be ridiculous. They're orphans, pawns, and you're playing a dangerous game. If you want them back, you'll have to pay the price, step down from the company, sign everything over to me, and disappear quietly. Otherwise, I'll make sure they're adopted separately. Scattered so far, they'll never see each other again." The cruelty of her words lit a fire in him. For the first time in his life, his fortune felt worthless. The boardrooms, the deals, the accounts, none of it could protect the 3 small girls who had placed their fragile trust in him. But he wasn't the man he had been months ago. He wasn't calculating everything in terms of risk and reward. He was a father now, and fathers fought. He called Marcus, his lawyer and oldest confidant, and told him to prepare for war. File whatever we have to. Challenge everything she's done. I don't care how much it costs. I want those girls back. Court became a battlefield. Victoria arrived each day in designer suits, her legal team stacked high with evidence meant to smear his name. They painted him as unstable, impulsive, reckless, with resources unfit to raise a child, let alone 3. They played recordings of him raising his voice, photos of him carrying Ivy through the city streets, twisting every act of love into suspicion. But Alexander had something stronger. He had truth. And he had the girls. When the judge allowed Sophia, the eldest, to testify, her small voice echoing through the chamber, every lie Victoria had crafted began to crumble. Maya told the court how he had been the first adult who didn't turn them away, how he fought for them when no one else would, how he promised they would never be separated. Leah, shy but brave, said he had read to them every night and taught them not to be afraid of the dark. Ivy, too young to speak with clarity, simply wrapped her arms around his neck in the middle of the proceedings and called him Daddy. The gallery went silent. Even the hardened faces of lawyers softened. The judge's stern expression shifted as the evidence of love spoke louder than the stacks of documents. Victoria tried to rally, insisting Alexander was manipulating the children, but her voice cracked under the weight of the truth. The more she pushed, the more she revealed her own motives, greed, inheritance control. In the end, her performance collapsed entirely, her composure slipping in front of the very court she hoped to sway. The ruling came swiftly. Temporary custody was granted to Alexander, with adoption proceedings to follow. The sound of Maya's sobs of relief, Leah's laughter, and Ivy's small hands clapping echoed louder than the gavel's strike. For the first time in weeks, Alexander felt hope surge through him. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Alexander ignored them all. He held his daughters close because that's what they were now, his daughters, and whispered, "No one will ever take you away from me again." The battle against Victoria wasn't just a fight for custody. It was a war for his soul. And as he walked down those courthouse steps with 3 small hands clinging to him, Alexander Cole knew he had already won more than any fortune could ever buy. The day the Bread of Light Cafe opened, Alexander Cole stood on the same sidewalk where his life had changed. A year earlier, he had walked out of the Glasshouse Bistro with his head full of stock numbers and his heart as cold as the marble tables inside. That afternoon he had heard a child's prayer over moldy bread in a filthy alley. Now, in its place, stood something entirely different, a cafe with open doors, bright colors, and the scent of fresh bread spilling into the street. The polished stone exterior of the old bistro had been transformed. Warm wooden beams framed the windows, and painted across the glass in bold letters were the words, "Bread of Light." Inside, laughter replaced the low murmur of elitist conversations. Children sat at long shared tables, some with parents, some alone, but all with plates of warm food in front of them. The smell wasn't of overpriced coffee, but of soup simmering bread, baking, and something sweeter hope. Maya, Leah, and Ivy clung to Alexander's hands as they stepped inside. The girls had insisted on being part of the opening ceremony, and he wouldn't have had it any other way. Maya, now 8, walked with a confidence that surprised him. Her shoulders were straighter, her eyes brighter, her voice steady. Leah, at 6, had blossomed from the timid child who once hid behind a blanket into a chatterbox full of stories she shared with anyone who would listen. And Ivy, just 4, skipped between them with her hair tied in ribbons, a ball of energy, who seemed determined to hug every person she met. The cafe buzzed with volunteers preparing for the day's meal service. Murals, painted by local artists, covered the walls bright scenes of gardens, children playing and families gathered around tables. At the far end, a chalkboard carried the words, "No child leaves hungry. Ever." Daddy Maya whispered, tugging his sleeve, "Are you nervous?" Alexander smiled, though his throat tightened. "Maybe a little. Are you?" She shook her head. "No, because this isn't just your cafe, it's ours too." Her words steadied him more than any speech ever could. When it was time, a crowd gathered. Neighbors, journalists, community leaders, and most importantly, dozens of children waited to hear why a millionaire had turned one of the city's most exclusive restaurants into a place where anyone could eat for free. Alexander stepped up to the small platform, his daughters at his side. For a moment he hesitated. Years of boardroom addresses had taught him how to project authority, but this wasn't about authority. It was about truth. He began simply. "A year ago, right outside this building, I watched a little girl kneel in an alley and thank God for a piece of bread she pulled from the trash. That moment broke me. It broke the man I thought I was, the man who believed wealth was the only measure of success. Her name was Maya, and she's standing right here with me today." Maya squeezed his hand but lifted her chin with quiet pride. The crowd leaned forward. She wasn't alone, Alexander continued. With her were Leah and Ivy, her little sisters, 3 children fighting to survive in a world that didn't see them. That day, I realized how blind I had been. I had spent my life chasing money, but I had never stopped to see the people who needed more than what money could buy. That moment didn't just change me, it gave me a family, and today it gives us this cafe. Applause broke out, but it wasn't polite or restrained. It was warm, rising from people who understood what it meant to be hungry, or who had known someone who was. Alexander stepped back, and to his surprise, Maya tugged the microphone from him. She spoke with a voice clear and strong, the way only a child who had faced the worst could. "When you're hungry, you feel invisible. People look at you like you're a problem, not a person. But Mr. Cold Daddy looked at us and saw something different. He saw that we mattered. And now we want other kids to feel the same." Her words silenced the room. Even seasoned reporters lowered their cameras, some wiping at their eyes. Leah, not to be left out, added shyly, "This cafe is for every kid who ever felt like there was no place for them. Here, everyone belongs." And then Ivy, clutching her stuffed bunny, shouted with all the unfiltered honesty of a 4-year-old, "And the bread isn't green anymore." The The crowd laughed to tears, mixing with smiles. The first meal was served minutes later, baskets of fresh rolls, steaming bowls of chicken noodle soup, slices of chocolate cake. Alexander watched as children who had once been strangers ate side by side, their laughter bouncing off the cafe walls. He watched Ivy sneak extra rolls to a boy. Half her size watched Leah tell a group of wide-eyed kids a story about princesses who fought dragons, and watched Maya sit beside a girl her own age, helping her sound out words from a donated book. This was more than charity. It was healing. It was dignity, restored one meal at a time. Later that evening, when the tables were cleared and the lights dimmed, Alexander sat in the corner with his daughters curled around him. Maya leaned against his shoulder, Leah rested her head in his lap, and Ivy dozed across his chest. The cafe was quiet now, but the warmth lingered, filling the space the way candlelight fills a dark room. He thought about everything he had lost: business deals, his public image, the approval of a sister who had once been his only family. None of it mattered now, because what he had gained was greater: 3 children who had taught him what love meant, and a mission that gave his wealth a purpose beyond himself. As he looked around the Bread of Light cafe, he knew this was more than a building. It was a promise that no child would have to kneel in an alley and thank heaven for food from a trash can. A promise that the miracle Maya once prayed for would not end with her, but spread to every child who walked through these doors. For Alexander Cole, the measure of success was no longer written in numbers or contracts. It was written in the laughter of children, the peace in their sleep, the hope in their eyes. And as he whispered goodnight to his daughters, he knew the greatest fortune of his life fit perfectly into his arms. In the end, Alexander Cole's journey was not about the millions he earned, nor the empire he once fought so hard to protect. It was about a single moment, a child kneeling in an alley, praying over a piece of moldy bread that shattered the walls he had built around his heart. From that moment forward, his life became a testament to transformation. He went from a man consumed by numbers and profit margins to a father who measured his wealth in the smiles of 3 little girls. Maya, Leah, and Ivy didn't just find shelter in his home. They gave him something he didn't know: he had lost the ability to love selflessly, to fight fiercely for what truly mattered, and to see humanity where he had once seen only statistics. Through battles against his sister Victoria, through the cruelty of a system that nearly tore them apart, Alexander discovered that real strength isn't in controlling people or money. It's in protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The Bread of Light Cafe became the final symbol of his transformation. What once was a sanctuary for the wealthy became a refuge for the forgotten. And every child who walked through its doors carried forward the miracle that began with one prayer in the alley. The lesson is as timeless as it is urgent. True success is not measured by the size of a bank account, but by the size of a heart. In our world today, it is easy to get lost in ambition, status, and possessions. Yet Alexander's story reminds us that we must stop and truly see those around us, the invisible, the vulnerable, the ones who need us most. It challenges us to ask ourselves, what would I do if I were in his shoes? Would I walk past, or would I stop? And maybe that's the question we need to take into our own lives. We may not all have millions to spend, but each of us has the power to share kindness, to defend the overlooked, and to create spaces where dignity is restored. Small acts, a meal, a word of encouragement, a moment of listening can change a life just as surely as Alexander's choice changed his. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in spreading more light in a world that too often feels dark, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Your support gives us the motivation to keep creating stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us of the power of compassion. Together, let's keep choosing love over indifference.